All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey, everybody, this is Tom Salami of Device Talks. Welcome back to the Device Talks weekly podcast. So this will be sort of a replay, sort of a preview podcast. We have Device Talks West coming up this Wednesday at the Santa Clara Convention Center. I sincerely hope you'll be there. I would love to meet each and every one of you. And if you are there, please make sure you say hello. It would be great to connect. So if you have not yet registered, you can, of course, go to DeviceTalks.com or west.devicetalks.com. If you want to skip a step, you can register right there. Use the code DTW25. So that stands for Device Talks West or Device Talks Weekly, DTW25, and you'll save 25% off the full price, which I think works out to the full price is $695. Discount brings it down to like $530 or something. We'll also have a cocktail reception the night before, so that would be on the 17th. You can attend that as well. That's an extra $25, but it should be well attended. We're inviting, of course, VIPs and speakers. So lots of great opportunities to connect. Shifa Med will be sponsoring a cocktail reception after day one on site at the Santa Clara Convention Center. So very grateful for their support. And of course, we'll have many great sponsors up on stage, sharing important lessons down on our exhibit partnering floor, making themselves available for questions, sharing their stories, and helping you build your devices better. So it's going to be 2 great days of discussions, of connections, of just enjoying the industry that we live in. So once again, I hope you'll join us. Go to devicetalks.com. I'll be conducting 4 interviews as well as leading some panel discussions as well. I'll open up with my interview with Julie Tyler, Senior Vice President of Abbott. She also leads Abbott's vascular business. We'll talk about how that business is growing. That's the start of day 1. The end of day 1, I'll interview Fred Kasravi. He is co-founder and CEO of Imperative Care. And Imperative Care, of course, is a neurovascular vascular business, but they're really adopting an approach to treating patients even beyond device intervention. And I had a prep call with Fred, and very inspiring. I'm really, really looking forward to that conversation. I think it's one of these next level moments for MedTech. And again, it's a great story. Imperative Care's executives will be presenting earlier in the day as well, a little more on their approach. So you can certainly attend both of those if you're at Device Talks West. We'll open up day 2 with my interview with Dave Rosa. He's president of Intuitive, which leads me to my the interview we're including today. I had the opportunity to interview Dave earlier this year for Intuitive Talks. I'm not big on doing replays. I try not to do them very often. But I wanted to share this one because it's going to get into his background, and it's going to get into sort of where he was at the time and Intuitive's history at the time. I only have 30 minutes with him on Thursday, so I want to use them well. So I'll probably spend less time talking about his background, more time talking about where Intuitive is headed. So you've got like kind of a bit of a primer, a bit of a backgrounder on Dave Rosa on today's podcast. So enjoy that. And finally, I'll end the day talking with, my final interview of the second day will be with Hani Abuhalka. He's company group chairman of digital and robotics at Johnson & Johnson MedTech. And we'll talk about how J&J is approaching both digital surgery and surgical robotics. So great conversation there as well. We'll actually end the day with a live Device Talks weekly show. We'll have Chris Newmarker up on stage. Kayleen Brown will pop up. We'll have others as well. Joe Mullings will be on hand to provide sort of his overview of what he saw at the show and what he's seeing in MedTech. So I'm sure we'll find some others as well. And we'd love to invite audience participation. So honestly, if you ever just sort of wanted to be part of the podcast, wanted to see what happens, we'd love to have you there. That takes place the around 4:15, I believe, on day 2, which is October 19th. So lots going on at DeviceTalks West. Go to devicetalks.com or west.devicetalks.com to review the agenda and the speaker list. And please make an effort to come out. We'd love to see you there. If you want to reach out to me via DM, love to help you find a way to get there. And reach out to me on LinkedIn. It would be great to have you. So I'm not going to do a normal sign off at the end of the day, at the end of the episode, rather. You can just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Tom Salemi at Device Talks. Connect with Chris Newmarker there as well. Chris as in a Newmarker. And we're just going to play now the interview I did with Dave Rosa, who has since been promoted. He's now president of Intuitive Surgical, but at the time he wasn't. So we'll run that interview. And then I hope we'll see you at Device Talks West again, October 18th and 19th at the Santa Clara Convention Center, where we've broken attendance records. It's going to be the biggest one ever. We blew past last year's total a long time ago. So it's going to be a great and busy couple of days. And I sincerely hope that you'll be there. Well, Dave Rosa, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure being here.
I'm excited to learn what you're doing at Intuitive today, but I just find your career fascinating, and the fact that you came and joined the company so early, right around its founding. I want to learn about your history first. So what was it that drew you into MedTech first? Have you always had an interest in it?
No. So it's a little bit of serendipity, maybe a little bit of the pinball theory of life. I was studying mechanical engineering at Cal Poly and had grown up in a very blue collar family and had expected kind of, trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I had accepted an internship in my junior year of college with PG&E. And that's where much of my family, it's a power company out in California.
Sure.
And so I had signed up and said, yep, I'll come and be an intern. I don't remember what I was going to do. And my mom at the time sent me there's no internet. So it sent me a little classified ad out of a local paper here at San Jose Mercury. It was an advertisement looking for an intern at a company called Accuson. And Accuson was a medical device ultrasound manufacturer back in the day. So it sounded better than PG&E. And so I went ahead and applied for it, and they accepted me. So I declined PG&E, went to Accuson, had a 3-month or so internship, and then they hired me back after I graduated. And so that was my foray into medical devices, not really knowing what it was, but then becoming very passionate about the intersection of engineering, mechanical engineering for me, and med device and patient care and all those sorts of things.
So what was it about your experience at Accuson that made you want to go back after you graduated?
I had a buddy or a mentor there that was just one of the most special people that I've ever met and worked with. And he actually was one of the primary reasons I joined Intuitive, because he predated me, if you will, and had joined a guy named Tom Cooper. And so an extraordinary engineer and an extraordinary man, both, so it's just those kinds of people are just incredibly impactful.
Wow. I love mentor stories. How do you act towards people as a mentor? Do you keep Tom Cooper's spirit in mind?
I try. I think about the people who have had impact in my life. And when we had a founding, an original CEO who then became chairman of the board for a while and then stepped off the board. And, we had a nice little celebration, unfortunately, during COVID. But during that time, I actually was thinking about the people who have influenced my life a lot. And, including my dad, Tom, that we talked about. I had a 6th grade teacher who actually was just really special. And we kept in touch until he passed away. And then Lonnie, who was the CEO at the time, just incredibly impactful. So, I have these mentors that I think I've been incredibly blessed to have. And so I try to do the same. What can I impart to people? It's part of the reason I joined startup boards. It's not that I can bring all this, great insights on technology or anything, but how do you build a company? How do you mentor people?
That's great. Well, I mean, as an engineer, did you ever think that you have insights on running companies, building companies? Kind of curious as to, I want to understand a little more how you came to Intuitive, but how did the transition from engineer to executive sort of happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's over time, and it's also a belief by, I don't know that, I'm confident in my abilities, but I think it always takes somebody else to point out and stretch you, right? And see a little bit more than you see in the mirror, kind of, and say, hey, I really believe you can go do this. And largely that's what happened with me is I wasn't managing Accuson. I was there for about 5 or 6 years and then moved over into Intuitive as a design engineer. And we can talk about it, but I very quickly kind of moved out of hardcore engineering and kind of more into what we call clinical engineering, but it's kind of the application of robotics and surgery and being sort of a connection point between surgeons and what's happening in the operating room and our engineering team, sort of a little bit of the translation back and forth.
Gotcha.
And it was when I sort of transitioned there, and that's when I was asked to start kind of trying to lead a team of doing the same thing. And then it's built from there.
So it's the odd opportunity when you can take a position that kind of gives you a broader view of the field. You can see both the outward view and the inward view. You see how it's made, but how it's used.
That's right. That was exactly sort of my role in the very, very early days of the company.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So how did you come to join Intuitive? You mentioned Tom Cooper's influence earlier. Was he the one who recruited you?
Well, not so much recruited, but I think was a major component of my decision. So Rob Young, so there are basically three founders of Intuitive: Rob Young, Fred Mull, and John Freund. And both John and Rob were affiliated with Accuson at the time. And so Rob was the VP of engineering in the area that I was engineering in at Accuson. And so he had left to join Fred and John and start Intuitive. And he then recruited, there was a guy named Bob Hager, who was kind of a senior leader under Rob in the organization. And then Bob recruited several of us. And so there was a little small team, I think maybe 5 of us or so, that kind of came over together, all within the span of maybe 3 or 4 months. Tom was one, and a guy named Mike Ikeda, who's still here, was another one, and Bob, myself, a guy named Alex Mayers. And so it was a little team that came over.
How did you view the opportunity? Was it still a medical device company in your mind, or were you moving into a different industry? How did you view Intuitive in those early days?
Well, I can tell you, my wife and I differed. She thought I was a little bit nuts trying to do it. Honestly, I think I was 28. I didn't have any of these deep insights about what Intuitive might be in the future. I'm going to join this, blockbuster company. It was one, the team that had said they were leaving Accuson to join Intuitive was, in my mind, second to none. 2, robotics sounded really interesting, right?
Yeah.
What better thing could you work on as a mechanical engineer? And then 3rd was this connection to the healthcare field, the medical device field. And so, I was like, hey, what more can you ask for? And why not take a risk? Why not try something? What
were those early days like? We had Gary Guthart at our DeviceTalks West meeting talking about sort of his first introduction to the Intuitive technologies. And he talked a bit about those early days, but what were those early days as Intuitive like? And actually, I also wanted to ask, and now it's coming back to mind, I've talked to a lot of people at Intuitive who've been there for a very long time, from the early days, it seems, more so than other companies where I've talked to. There are sometimes people who have been there their entire career, but Intuitive people, they seem to stick. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. It's hard for me, having been here so long, it's hard for me to compare it to other companies.
Sure.
But I do feel like we do have the ability to retain people for a long, long time, and people want to do it. And I think for me, it's a combination of a couple of things. And it goes for some of the reasons I joined. The people, the team here are really are extraordinary, and they're extraordinary engineers, are extraordinarily capable. They're extraordinary, just people who are aligned on a mission. And it's one of the things I really appreciate about Intuitive, as compared to other medical device companies, and everybody has their place, but we're very singularly focused on a set of technologies that are advancing interventions. And so, we're not in cardiac rhythm management. We're not these other things, really highly focused. And I think that too is a way in which we all speak a common language. And so You go great technology, really an aligned mission, an extraordinary team around you, and also a job that's nowhere near done. So like we're just in 27 years later, we're just scratching the surface, in my opinion, on what robotics and data and all these other things can bring to the world.
Did you have a sense, say 10, 20 years ago, where you might be or where Intuitive might be? And are you where you thought you might be? Or was Intuitive, the concept's so new that I don't know where this is going, but it's great.
It's a good question. There was a point in time where you go, wow, I think there's a real there. And I don't know when that was. Maybe 10 years ago. I'd have to kind of think through the timeline there. In the early part of the company, we never believed, we always have a vision, but not a vision of like where we are today. And, Tom, the early part of the company was filled with failures and difficult times. And, we had layoffs. We were struggling to even make a device work. And so you have a vision, and Fred and Rob and others kind of driving through all those difficult times. And the one thing that I remember for me personally was when the company was started, we as an engineering team, they basically said, can you please replicate open surgery in a minimally invasive approach? That was the whole idea. Add wrist, add 3D vision, add this great motion, those sorts of things. And the foundation that was created back then is more or less the same foundation as of today. It's kind of the foundational robotic capabilities are wrist, 3D vision, intuitive motion, the things that were the same even 25 years ago. And in those early days when we got it all to work, which was kind of rare sometimes, it was magic. You knew you had something that could do extraordinary things in surgery and minimally invasive surgery that couldn't be replicated with laparoscopic technique. And so we get a little recipe and the cake would taste great on that day for that 20 minutes. And then, it'd all fall apart and you do it again, and it becomes repeatable, And so that's when you go, man, there is a there.
I imagine just having that taste of success, even if it's 20 minutes long, it just makes you want to get back to there again and to find that success again.
It does.
That's exciting. I also enjoy talking with you and Gary and others, just when you talk about the technology and the tools, how your eyes sort of light up, like you're really still enamored with what you've been able to do and what you think you're capable of doing going forward, or what the Da Vinci and the other systems are.
Yeah. Yes.
So let's fast forward to today. You're Executive Vice President, Chief Strategy and Growth Officer. What are your duties? What are your responsibilities there?
Yeah, it's sort of, I would say maybe threefold. One is in particular trying to see where's the company going from here? What are the sort of the avenues of growth where Intuitive can continue to fulfill its mission, where the technologies, the products that we're developing can bring value to the world. And some of them are obvious and it doesn't take a lot of input because we're on those growth curves today and all the procedures and where the technology is being applied. And then there are new areas where the systems that are in development and use today can make dents, in some of the healthcare challenges that are out there. And then there are potential business model changes that can come along with those, or modifications and tweaks that are in there. And then there are seeds that we want to plant that are further out, right? These are longer term bets and trying to address unmet needs in healthcare. And you could look all across healthcare and you and I could come up with a list going, boy, this is an area that's just not well served. And so how do we do better there? And that's where I still believe that the robotics, the precision and access associated with them, visualization, data, those sorts of things, the confluence of those things will make a big difference. And so that's one big area of focus for me. And that's kind of the growth and strategy side. The other part is I have our marketing team under me as well. And so that's how do we message, how do we communicate value, a lot of it. Because part of it is engineering it and making the device, and part of it is actually the communication and measurement of it as well, to ensure that you're actually doing what you say you're going to do. And we have, if we get a chance, there's a really cool set of data that has been developed internally that I think is just powerful and kind of checks the box, if you will, on the impact robotics can have in the world. And if we get a chance, I'll tell you about it at a high level. But the other thing that's not necessarily in my job description, but I'm super passionate about in the role is the culture of the company. It's a little bit about what you described in terms of why we have long-term employees, but how do we retain an innovative entrepreneurial culture that's differentiated in the world of medical devices so that we can attract and retain the very best, but also it's noticed by our customer community too, right? And they say, yeah, Intuitive is different to work with. They're insanely competent. You care about the problem to be solved and it's about the patient and it's not about Intuitive. And so that's maybe the three that I, focus on a daily basis.
That's a cool job. You piqued my interest about the data. So let's roll into that. I'm now
Sure.
Keep thinking about it. What's he got? So what's the data? Talk a bit about that. Share that if you would.
Yeah, sure. So I think robotic assisted surgery is the most written about device in the peer reviewed literature. I think there are over 40,000 articles now that are out there published around Da Vinci and its impact. And so the team here, statisticians in that world, our clinical team, has taken a look through that literature and put together what we call a meta-analysis. So what we can do is go in there and look for the highest level of evidence papers that exist in that sphere of 30,000 plus articles. And there's 182 that are of level, I think it's 2C and higher. So these are their own meta-analyses, randomized control trials, that sort of thing. You take those 182 and combine them in a way that's statistically relevant. And in there are about 700,000 patients in robotic surgery, 700,000 patients in laparoscopy or thoracoscopy, and about 750,000 in open surgery. Mm-hmm. And in that set of data, they're across 7 cancer procedures. And so this is like partial nephrectomy, prostatectomy. We have cancer hysterectomy and a few others, thoracic surgery. And it looks across outcomes that are things like readmissions, mortality, blood transfusion, length of stay, time in the OR, those kinds of things. And so I think there are 7 or 8 variables. And so when you do the analysis, robotic assisted surgery is actually statistically ahead, and it has advantages in 5 of the 7 outcomes. So it's better in mortality, it's better in blood loss, it's better in conversion rate, and it's equal on 30-day readmissions, and it's behind, if you will, on operative time. If you stand back and you say, we as a collective company have invested, I don't know how much, billions, right, trying to create these products, all these people's time and everything else. Is it really, it doesn't matter. Does it make a difference? Mm-hmm. And I have anecdotal stories all over the place and been in a huge number of surgeries. And our customers believe that, but this is a set of evidence that kind of statistically says, yeah, it's making a difference, mm-hmm. And that's powerful, right? And why you see an industry forming, I think, around it, because we're seeing what it can do.
Those are great numbers. Do you think that those numbers are recognized in the clinical world, that they see things the same way? Because for a time, and I think it's less so now, but 10 years ago, robotic systems were, that's just something for a billboard to draw people. And then it was dismissed as being a value add in any way. But those numbers suggest otherwise.
Tom, it is a absolute great question. And you're exactly right. There was, and again, though, it's a little bit of a life cycle of almost any technology, right? Yeah. Especially in healthcare. There's always you put a product on the market and you get feedback and you have to improve it. And all of a sudden there starts to be data generated, at least in our world. And it takes time, right? So you will have that early adoption phase. That is some billboards and marketing and that sort of thing, and anecdotal evidence and small series from a single surgeon that says, yeah, it's making a difference. And so, there is a time constant to this thing that takes time for data to be developed. And if you look at where we are now, I would say largely, not 100%, but largely people understand that value. And so there is enough data out there, and in particular, enough hospitals that understand their own data. So it's not looking at somebody else's data who may do it differently. One of the things I'm most proud of the company and of our team and where we've been focusing is having economists and our teams work very carefully and closely with hospitals who have better and better data about their own sort of programs and outcomes, and saying, let's analyze it. Let's analyze your data and do basically a comparison between robotic laparoscopy or any manual MIS and open surgery. And it's just, let's look and see what's going on in terms of the outcomes you care about. And so it becomes very relevant to them. And that has become an increasing part of why I think robotics has become adopted and embedded in institutions.
Interesting. As you were giving those numbers in my head, I'm thinking, well, a lot of that, the performance comes from the performance of Da Vinci in your surgical systems, because you've been the principal provider of, I know there are others, but you've been the principal provider of surgical robotic systems up until now. We're reaching a point where other larger companies are bringing their surgical systems online in a year or 2 years, however soon. I guess what I'm trying to ask is there a concern that as more people enter the space that those numbers change, or do you see that there's a decent amount of quality out there across the field that their surgical robotics will continue to perform as it has in the past?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, I think there's a couple of ways to answer it, but one is just bringing those products to market, period, through regulatory agencies. The bar has been raising and changing over the years as the FDA and other bodies kind of learn the industry of medical robotics, surgical robotics. And so things like human factors and, other areas of testing have become part of what's expected to get on the market. So I think the bar is higher just to be on the market as compared to 25 years ago.
Interesting. Good point.
So that's maybe one that helps a little bit just to get started at a step forward than we used to be.
Mm-hmm.
But, I do worry that it's more than a robot. And this is something that I do worry about is in order to produce outcomes like that, it is more than just saying, okay, I have a system that has a wrist and 3D vision, and therefore I'm going to have the same exact effect and outcomes as what's been happening for 25 years. And the answer is that's false, right? That the robot's a piece of the puzzle, but behind that are instruments, training, the residency and fellowship programs, how good your vision is, how reliable the system is, right? So it isn't converting because the system fails. And there's an entire set of things to measure that go way, way beyond just the robot per se itself. So I don't think that you can see those outcomes at scale until other companies kind of get through those cycles of learning in the beginning.
That's interesting. That's a great point. So I wouldn't ask you to assign a piece of pie of one size to another to your success, but how big of a part is the non-technical part of Intuitive's business, the training, the residency programs, the support of the surgeons? How much of that is connected to your success compared to the actual technology itself? We did a robot that we designed to do this, and it does this.
Yeah, it's a really important part. It's hard. I don't know that I can assign a piece of pie. But it's
unfair question, but
no, it's okay. But it's a big part of our focus and investment. Our chief medical officer has multiple organizations that are focused exactly on, this is training science. How do people learn? How do we help people get up a training curve more quickly? Our machine learning and AI teams are working really hard on, are there ways in which we can help people train and understand robotics and workflow and other things that aren't in the OR, right? And this is like simulation or other vehicles. And so the answer to your question is it's a big part. And it goes all the way down now into residency programs where, today robotics is a key part, I think, of over 90% of the residency programs in urology, general surgery, GYN, right? And just that in and of itself and the investments there is a big part of proliferating, the sort of what does it take to apply robotics in your practice that is it's scalable, into how do you produce and robotic surgeons, if you will, or those who are really adept at it earlier in their career. That's not going to a lab for a day and then going in the OR and trying it. It's a very sophisticated pathway.
Interesting. So let's talk a bit strategy and where you're headed in the future. Where do you see your growth and opportunity, both in new technologies? We talked about with Gary Guthart, we talked about ION at DeviceTalks West, and we've talked about it on the podcast as well. And geographic markets too. Where do you see the opportunities there?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with geographic markets. There has to be sort of a big, because sometimes you get asked about, hey, can't robotics make a difference in some of the developing countries? And maybe in time, but I wouldn't say that's the first answer to help, improve their healthcare system overall. So, there's got to be, I would say, a foundation of a surgical foundation within the country, reimbursement, hospitals, the post surgical care, those sorts of things. Just as it foundationally, why would you enter geography or not? Many are obvious, right? It's always the same ones for around the world, the US, Europe, parts of Asia, that kind of thing are always the big ones. But there are emerging, there are some markets out there where the government has actually said, look, we think robotics is important to help take care of our constituents. And so we're actually going to try to incent by changing reimbursement for robotics. And that, increasingly, that's another piece of the puzzle that says, hey, there's evidence to support that outcomes are improved versus other modalities. So how do we help bring it along? All right. And we either go direct in markets or we work through distributors, that however we decide to do it, then our job is just to say, okay, where and how can robotics make a difference in healthcare? There has to just be a foundation and a volume to support a good program. The last thing you need is a robotic system in an account that's rarely used, right? Because that's not good for anyone. And so there's no science behind the geographic expansion. And within each geography, then you see a very kind of classic set of adoptions. You start generally with urology or some other cancer operations that are typically done open. And then those can convert to a minimally invasive approach, a lot of value there. And then they start those kind of core procedures, foundational procedures. Surgeons will start adding on other ones to those. And then care teams and scale become, kind of part of the story, and they get used to it. And then they start adding procedures onto that. And it's just a very classic set of adoption curves as we talk about it. On the technology side, I would say there are probably maybe two areas because there's a lot, so I could talk forever. There are two areas that I think about a lot and that I'm really excited about. So I don't think in order to improve surgery and take it from where kind of we are today, that you need a better grasper or a wrist that bends a little bit more. That's not the core of what's going to take outcomes forward. I'm not so excited about saying, hey, guess what, Tom? We're going to produce a 7mm wrist versus an 8mm wrist. What I get really excited about is how can we help surgeons see more about what they're doing? And so when you watch surgery, you watch, quote, an experienced, really good surgeon versus someone who's not so experienced and, quote, not so good. It's not that one can manipulate the instrument better than the other. They're both very technically competent. Typically has a lot more to do about tissue planes and the subtleties of where bleeding might occur and where it won't occur. Where is something that really matters, like a ureter or nerves or something else. It's the knowledge of the anatomy. And so how do we help that? How do we help expedite that and make it so that you don't need 1,000 cases to learn that sort of anatomical variation? And so fluorescence guided surgery is a big piece of this puzzle, where you can inject a fluorescing marker into the body, and using infrared lasers in the system, it lights up and it looks, it's pretty amazing. And so we have a molecule in development that's specific to prostate cancer, for example. And you can inject the drug, turn on the infrared laser and see the prostate cancer. And if the surgeon has resected the prostate but happens to leave some behind, they can go back out and resect that and work for a negative margin. So, and that's not possible in white light imaging. So I get, and there's other things, hyperspectral, all these other modalities that are out there that can help the surgeon sort of better understand what he or she is looking at in the field. And it could be cancer, nerves, vasculature, ureter, whatever it may be. And that to me is sort of a huge piece of the puzzle going forward that I'm really excited about. Probably the other one, for me at least, is thinking about focal therapy. So today, for cancer in particular, it's kind of many big operations. You take out a prostate, right? You take out chunk of a part of a liver, you take out part of the stomach, or whatever it may be, a section of the colon. And as work is being done outside of Intuitive for liquid biopsy, better imaging, you see that cancer might become detected earlier, right? When it's smaller and not symptomatic. And so if that's true, and you go, okay, by that as a thesis, and I don't think we'd argue that, it should be possible to treat it earlier too, if we can localize and everything else. And this is, again, where I believe that the things that robotics does well, precision, access, think about ion, right, in the lung. It can get up into multiple generations of the lung, find a small lesion. Mm-hmm. Today, it's doing a biopsy, but there was a lot of work being done on how to ablate it locally, right? And so you can apply that, I think, in multiple areas of the body. And so there's that kind of general trend of science, and this is a whole bunch of people working in the area of just trying to detect cancer earlier, that I think we'll be able to treat it earlier too. And I'm excited about that.
And just quickly about the molecules, the contrast agents, or sure, whatever help. That is an internal program. That's something internal to Intuitive. And how big of a part of your business do you see that becoming? Because it would seem to be a completely different type of business than surgical robotics.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not.
We have a lot of things where you go, it feels a little bit different, but it's part of that ecosystem we're talking about. Okay. So today, if you were to take an example of one of the areas where we're getting traction is for cholecystectomy, taking a gallbladder out. Mm-hmm. And you might go, I wonder why, because it's well penetrated with laparoscopy today. And so why is it adopting on the robot? Do you really need it? And one of the main reasons is because for fluorescent imaging, we call it Firefly, it's available and used more than half the time. I think it's over 60% now, where surgeons are using Firefly just to confirm they understand the anatomy. So now they can go in every case, every patient, confident that they'll finish it minimally invasive. So they have great imaging and they have great tools to do even a very difficult gallbladder that may have very difficult anatomy. Whereas before, they might go in and get it done sometimes and not others and have to convert to open. And now it's just, it's kind of commonplace. Hey, I'm going to do it. I may not have needed it per se, but it's there, and I know I'm going to finish it.
Interesting. Final question, kind of, I guess, a twofer, in that we talked about early on, what do you think Intuitive would become at this point, or where it would be today? I'm curious, looking forward just maybe 10 years, what do you see Intuitive becoming? What kind of company does it look like? And where does it fit into the landscape of other companies who will be selling surgical robotics in the space?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tom. We talked briefly before about how our mission is very focused, very singular on creating technology that in surgeons' hands just really make a difference. And I don't see that changing. Mm-hmm. And so minimally invasive care, if you were to look for 10 years, the company will have been larger and we will be addressing more disease states, right? But it will be with sort of the foundational kind of technology that we talk about, which is, robotics, imaging, trying to access anatomy always in a less invasive manner. And so I expect to be one of the, preeminent medical device companies out there, and with class leading technology that, we continue to just innovate on a daily basis, kind of our core DNA, that will have moved for the measures that you should care about: outcomes, cost, and the experience of the patient. That, today, those are substantively better than they are today.
Just a quick follow-up. Gary made that point at the conversation we had at DeviceTalks West. Looking at the competitive landscape, he described Intuitive as fitting in and sort of going up against or other medical device companies. Those were his primary concern. You just said that Intuitive is a medical device company. When did Intuitive, in your mind, become a medical device company? Or is it becoming a medical device company? Or has it always been a medical device company?
I think that's more I've used it forever. I've always thought about it as a medical device company. Never thought about it as a robotic company or anything else.
Interesting.
Medical device company, but actually I would argue in some ways would say it's a minimally invasive care company, because it goes beyond the device, right? Where you could expand that term, but think about all the digital aspects of what's happening, the integration of data, how we might use data. That isn't necessarily the traditional definition of a device company, right? That you're usually selling some piece of hardware that has to go get sterilized. So I have a minimally invasive care company that looks across a spectrum of advanced technologies and can integrate those up in a way that's just going to make a difference. right? That to me is more about minimally invasive care.
Excellent. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation, and thanks for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate what you do for us.
All right, Alad, I couldn't just end it without saying goodbye. So I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dave Rosa. If you want to hear more from him, of course, join us at DeviceTalks West on October 18th and 19th, coming up in Santa Clara. Register with the code DTW25 to save 25%. Connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll get you there. Go to DeviceTalks.com for more information, or west.devicetalks.com if you want to skip a step. So that's it, folks. Sincerely, it's going to be a great couple of days. Hope you're there. Say hello when you come. Take care, everybody.